Okay, I think it's time to get started. I'm sorry I'm running a little late this morning. Time kind of got away from me, and it seems like I got to do a few orbits around the parking lot to get a spot. So just to give you a bit of rundown as to where we are, I like to make sure everyone is familiar with what we're doing. So today I'm going to talk about chapter 6, which is really the first true. So from here on out, it's going to be all macro all the time, and we'll be talking about this. Some of the concepts today that we're going to be covering throughout really the rest of the semester, things like gross domestic product, inflation, price indexes, things like that. So we're going to be covering that for quite some time. And then I think probably we'll still be looking at some of this on Thursday. It may be the case, I was sort of looking this over yesterday, that we'll be working a little bit ahead of time here, and which is good. And we may get into chapter 8 a little bit. That's the next chapter. We're skipping chapter 7. Chapter 7 deals with economic growth, which is not unimportant, but it's not really what we're looking to do here for the most part. So, so it is possible, and that's okay. One of the things about this course, probably uniquely of all the courses I take, is that if there's any course in which we sometimes do get a little bit behind, it's this one. So if we're a little bit ahead of the game, that's fine. I don't intend to add any new content to the course. It's not like we're going to be working at zipping along here and adding new content. That's not the plan. It's just that we may be just a little bit ahead of the pace. Okay. But, I don't know. We'll have to see it once we get into it. So we're going to cover that today. I did want to talk about the exam, which was last week. And I haven't had a chance to look at the exam scores and all, and who took it and who did not. But if you didn't take the exam last week and you do want to do it as a makeup, then get with me as soon as possible if you would, so that I can arrange the time for you to take that. It's just a matter of getting the exam in Brightspace, and but I have to know a date, so we have to coordinate this because I have to manually make it available to you. And once everyone's taken it, if everyone has taken it, again, I'll take a look here when I go to my office after class. But if everyone's taken it, I'll make the exam available so you can see what these answers were, what you might have missed, what you got right, etc., and go. So anyway, that's the plan. Any questions for me about anything that we're doing here today? Okay, well, let's do this. Let's talk about chapter 6. I said at the outset here, that's fine. This is really the first true macro chapter, and so and that is the first 3 chapters that we talked about, chapters 1, 2, 3. And really including the appendix, to be honest with you, we're really not. Today's 31st. Is it? Today's 31st. Yes. They really weren't macro in essence. In fact, and I know I said a number of occasions that for the first segment of the class, we'd be covering some content that was common to both micro and macro both. And now it's going to be all macro throughout. And so for those who are taking both classes at the same time, which a number of people do, and a number of people say to me by week 3, are you sure these are 2 different classes? And yes, they are. We are sure they're 2 different classes. So this is where we're splitting off here. And so we're going to talk about output. Okay. And so what we're going to do with this discussion is we're going to get into talking about total production of goods and services throughout the economy and how we arrive at this number. And I'm going to show you, hopefully without too much difficulty, what some of the current numbers are, some of the historical numbers. And I say without too much difficulty because as I was in my office yesterday, I was reminded of something I didn't really need reminding of, and that's the idea of the website that contains this data. Every time I go into it, every semester, it's usually about this time every semester, they move things around. It's really hard to find. I don't know what it is about the Bureau of Economic Analysis. They continually move things around. You just got to hunt and find them. And it's really frustrating for those of us who do this on a daily. I mean, if I do it on a daily basis, it's not that big of a deal, but it's once a semester that I'm into it, and I know what I'm looking for. I just don't know how they label things, and it's not that intuitive. So I'll pull that up here. But before we do that, though, before we get into some numbers and the actual numbers, let's talk about what some of these definitional items are. And that is, we're going to be talking about the term output and the term income. We're going to say the terms are going to be used interchangeably. Kind of like the way goods and services are used, where we sort of use a euphemism, goods, for both. Here, I guess a difference in the sense that we'll be talking about output, we'll be talking about income, and it doesn't make any difference Output equals income equals GDP, output equals income equals GDP, and also we use the capital letter Y to represent gross domestic product. And I'm going to get into what gross domestic product is. Basically, the definition in your text offers it is the total output of final goods and services produced in an economy in a given year. So it's the total value of all output, okay? And I guess what I probably should have put there as an adjective in front of output is final output. Now, what do I mean by final output? And how is final output differentiated from other output? What's the difference? Or is there a difference? Well, the issue is final output is a good that's all done being processed, okay? So some goods are not captured in the GDP numbers except indirectly through a sort of through a value chain sort of progression. That is, all the output of farmers is not included in GDP. What's included in GDP, the gross domestic product value, is the products that farmers' output creates, whether it's beef or corn or the breads and all the final goods, the green beans, all the final goods that are produced, but not those intermediate outputs. All coal producers, all extractive industries for the most part produce goods that are not final goods. Instead, they're still being processed. All intermediate goods, so companies that produce things like wire and screws and nuts and bolts and timber or lumber, and none of these are final goods because they usually go into something else. Now, I guess if you buy lumber at Home Depot and you're going to build a deck on the end of your house, that probably is final output. But for the most part, that's an exception. That's probably not a big number, frankly, when you consider a $25 trillion economy. So all the output is final output, final goods and services. Now, one thing that's interesting about services is I'm hard pressed to think of too many services in which there's intermediate output. That is, we don't count the value of the service because it's still being worked on and it's going to somehow move downstream. And the only one that maybe I can think about is anything related to research that might become a final product. But even there's been a debate among accountants and economists both for years as to how we account for R&D, research and development. Do we account for it as once the good is produced and simply then we capture all the years of research into making a new drug or some new technological innovation or whatnot? It's really difficult. So I don't know that you could say that research goes into it as an intermediate good. So I think it's difficult to say that any service is intermediate. Those are mostly final. So it's goods of a physical nature, okay? So here's the thing that we should know, and this is something that I think eludes a lot of people, unfortunately, and it really is important. That is the value of all output equals the value of all income received. And that is, it's a very important relationship that probably was not really that well understood until about the 1930s when macro sort of became invented out of necessity, really. And that's the idea that my spending is your income and your spending is my income. The only way to get income is to have somebody spend in order to create income for you. It's got to create some sort of income stream. And if in fact there's a cutoff, there's some sort of interruption in spending, then there's an interruption in income. And this would be any kind of interruption. It could be even the case in which people decide not to spend money for whatever reason. And as a result, the economy slows down. And I think I mentioned to the class the other day that after the 9/11 terrorist attacks, a lot of Americans were, understandably sort of shaken up and didn't really want to travel very much, didn't want to spend money, want to kind of save and, sort of hunker down, kind of in their cave sort of mentality. And the president at the time said, look, everyone, go travel, get on the plane, go to Disney World and whatnot. And he got some criticism for that, as I mentioned before. I know I talked about this scenario earlier, but it's an important thing to realize because it was playing out in real time, this idea that people stop spending, people stop earning income. So my spending is your income, your spending is my income. So these terms are used interchangeably: GDP, gross domestic product, the capital letter Y. So whenever you see the capital letter Y, it represents gross domestic product. That is that total value of all goods and services produced. Output and income, they're all used interchangeably. Now, where does Y come from? And I think, I don't actually know for sure, although what I have heard over the years is that it's really sort of a mathematical reference in the sense that when we talk about dependent variables in mathematics, like Y equals some function of X, where there's dependency of Y on X, that Y is the dependent variable. Well, here, what is Y dependent upon? Y is the scoreboard, and it's all the action on the other side of the equation the independent variables that influence that. So Y doesn't do anything, Y just is. It's the scoreboard. It's the scoreboard number. So in order to manage the scoreboard number, you've got to manage the action on the field, right? The independent variables, the players in the field, you got to manage their out. And then the score will take care of itself, sort of that kind of idea. And so as a result, that's where that sort of comes from. So whenever you see that, it's going to be gross domestic product. And we're going to sort of put one additional modifier onto this as we get going, and that is inflation adjusted. But we haven't really talked very much about inflation yet. We're going to sort of get into that later and what that means when we talk about something that's called real versus nominal. One final thing before we move on here, and that is this idea of how do we arrive at this value and where does it come from? And there's really an interesting piece in your in the Green Law text, the OpenStax text, that talks about all the effort that goes into trying to compute GDP. And it's not an easy process. It's only reported once a quarter. And that first figure that's given is not rounded to the nearest dollar or penny or anything like that. In fact, it's really an estimate. And it's an estimate based upon things like surveys that are being done, projections as to what maybe manufacturers would have produced based upon their prior purchases of materials, given the rate at which some industries are growing, including service industries. It includes things like payroll data, because payroll data is a pretty good indicator of wages received. And so a lot of this is an estimate, and it's revised. So we get this value about once a quarter. It usually comes out sometimes a few weeks after a quarter ends. And so we're going to have a GDP number very soon for the fourth quarter. In fact, we got sort of an estimate that looked pretty good. Last week was about a 2.9% increase in GDP on an annualized basis. And what does that mean, annualized? Because we're going to see this when we get into showing the analysis. It's basically saying you take a quarter's worth of output. And if you want to annualize that, you would theoretically multiply it by 4, but you don't really multiply it by 4 because there are what we call seasonal adjustments. And there's one big area of the economy that requires a seasonal adjustment because it's very chunky and bulky. Anybody know what that might be? Where you've got to kind of smooth it out of the year because it's artificial. Fourth quarter consumer spending, right? And so, have you ever heard the term Black Friday? Which I can't even imagine it's in black as an accounting term. I can't imagine it's moved into everyday speech. What does that mean? Black Friday means that it's theoretically the point at which the retailers are in the black, that they're now making money where they weren't before. So.
Does the GDP term start when the government fiscal year starts, or is it
no
different?
No, it does not. In fact, no, that's a good point because the government's fiscal year runs from October 1st to September 30th, and so GDP is usually computed on a quarterly basis. So first quarter is January through March, second quarter April through June. So no, it's based on a calendar. That's a good question because that doesn't come up very often. But the government has a different fiscal year than everyone else for reasons that are only unique to government. I suspect it has to do with tax receipts that arrive in the middle of that period. So it gives the government a chance to collect those, even the late taxes, or usually do it in April, but September to do that. Basis. So the fourth quarter data came out last week. It'll be revised. It'll be changed. It'll be up or down a little bit. It's pretty good though. I mean, it's not going to go from 2.9% annualized positive to negative 2.9%. It's not going to be that big of an adjustment. And by the way, if it goes negative, then we've got some things that we should be talking about where the economy is. But the economy is still growing relatively strongly, and we're going to talk about what that means. That always sounds like good news, but one of the things that I think we should keep in mind is good news in macroeconomics doesn't always mean good news for everybody else. And this is the thing that drives people crazy about economics, is the idea that some people benefit from some things, from some economic phenomena, and some others don't. Okay, so a strong economy sounds like it's a great thing, but the problem is it means prices are rising still pretty rapidly, which means the interest rates are going to rise as a result of that in order to try to slow this economy down. Why? Because if inflation keeps rising, and we all know, for those of us who have to shop on a daily basis, we all know these prices are going up and they've got to come down. But the only way to do this is to slow the economy down, which means creating more unemployment. So it's a real dilemma. It's a real dilemma. And we're going to talk plenty about that as we get going throughout the semester, what that means. Okay, so one final thing I was going to talk about with regard to GDP is this idea, how do we account for it? Well, it's revised. These numbers get revised a couple of times. And sometimes they get revised based upon things like business financial statements, which are very, very accurate. Also, and it sounds like it's not really a serious statement, but tax return data is very, very accurate. Most corporations use professional accountants to do their taxes, and they're done pretty accurately. They really are. I mean, the phony baloney accounting that we saw 20 years ago did not relate to tax data. It related to some other kinds of things that were being done, which is why the accounting profession was really under scrutiny in the early 2000s because of just some real scandals at some of the big corporations. A small sliver, not many, but it required some additional regulation and oversight. But because for the most part, that accounting is very, very accurate, as is tax return data. And by the way, most individual tax return that you and I would produce is extremely accurate because there aren't really that many ways to cheat on your taxes as an individual. First of all the income you receive probably is already reported to the government on a W-2 or an interest income statement. So the government's already got your numbers, and really then it becomes about what you're able to deduct. And the answer today is not very much. Most people can't deduct very much on taxes. So those are very accurate, and those are used as a sort of a bit of revision, so that when we say revision, we're just sort of simply tweaking and modifying it and correcting what was really an initial estimate based upon that data. And again, I would urge you, if you really are wanting to get a closer glimpse into how this all works, at that article in chapter 6 about how it's collected. Sometimes it's just a matter of just doing legwork and collecting data, and it's really a fairly interesting process. And the same goes with collecting price data. When we get into talking about inflation, that's coming up next week, we'll talk more about that specifically. Okay, so all these terms are going to be used interchangeably. And the thing about it is that we take this for granted today, but if you think about this, some of the macroeconomic problems that existed in all economies, including our own, prior to the Great Depression, were as much of the fact that the economy wasn't very well regulated. And if you want to talk about accounting standards, they were practically non-existent prior to, say, the early 1900s. And so there was just nothing standardized and nothing really coordinated, and the government had a very small role to play. And importantly, how do you even account for, in an economy that barely has telephones, or prior to telephones didn't have telephones, much less computers and instantaneous data, where you're trying to collect all this information? It is really, really hard. And so when I get into the BEA website, the Bureau of Economic Analysis, you'll see some of the data goes back to, I think it goes back to the 1860s, I want to say. But that data has got to be really out of whack, because how on earth could you have created that information? How would you have collected it in an economy that was mostly rural, spread out, difficult to collect data, and for people who probably didn't want to report data to the government anyway, and so it was really until about 1940, which is fairly recently. I know both my parents were still alive, so they were alive in an era when they weren't really collecting very good information. It really wasn't known what was going on in the economy, frankly. How do you know if you don't have the data to manage? And so kind of spoiled now, and those of us in our profession look at what was done prior and say, wow, that was really heavy lifting, trying to get a grip of all the output income being produced in an economy prior to the time when good data was being collected. And about 1940 is really about the time that the government started to collect data, because, in a very meaningful and systematic way, which looks a lot like what we do today, because of the necessity of the Great Depression, and then gearing up for World War II, which I think a lot of people knew was coming, and it really was important for everybody to understand what was happening. Okay, so that's what's going on. There is no giant supercomputer. That's what's interesting is I think sometimes if you fast forward to today, I think a lot of people think that every time you buy gas or get paid or whatever, it's like ringing the register in some giant computer in Northern Virginia or outside Washington. It's really not. There's no giant computer sucking up all this information. At some point, maybe we'll get to that point, but we're not there yet. So as a result, all this has got to be collected from out in the economy. Okay, all right. So questions so far about any of that? All right, well, there are two main approaches to computing this gross domestic product figure. And by the way, if you were to look somewhere like old textbooks or maybe talk to an older person, they might use the term gross national product, GNP, which was used for many, many, many years, and sometimes changed around 1990 to gross domestic product, because the idea was we're counting the output that's produced in the US economy without regard to the nationality of the producer themselves, whatever the producers are. So it could be a foreign firm that's doing business in the United States, that's fine. Gross national product would say, okay, well, if you're a British firm doing business in the US, we take that out of GNP because you're a British firm, not an American firm. We don't care about that so much anymore. In terms of, for this purposes of accounting for GDP, we're most interested in what goes on in the domestic economy, regardless of the nationality of either an individual or a firm. And likewise, if an American firm is doing business in England, then we would take that out of the US economy, even though they would report income to the US government, because US taxpayers report income on their worldwide income. Okay, so that's an important thing. GNP is an old school term. We'll still come across it, but for the most part, it's GDP. There are two approaches. There actually is a third one, but I didn't include it here. It's a bit beyond where we want to go in this course. So I just know there is another one. I'm not ignoring it. But this also dovetails very nicely with how we're going to sort of approach this. One is called the expenditures approach, and it's the measurement of the economy from the demand side. And when we say demand, we're going to sort of modify that concept of demand to include the term aggregate demand. We'll be using the term aggregate throughout this course. What does the term aggregate mean? It means the collection of everything, right? So I can pick a random person in this room and say, what is your age? And you say 21, right? And I can have all of our ages, right? And together we're 240, right? Something like that, or whatever the number is. I probably way on the scale pretty hard on that scale, right? So, but you get the idea. It's an aggregate value. It's a collection. And so that's what's going on here is the aggregate demand side of the macro economy. So and who are we talking about? Households, firms, and governments. And importantly, we're going to add a new piece to this, and that's the rest of the world. The rest of the world. And that is the idea that we're now going to include purchases and sales of goods, excuse me, across international boundaries. Okay. This is important because this also counts in the GDP figure. Okay. Losing my voice. It's only half an hour in, so it's not good. So we're going to be talking about this. I'll be sort of breaking this a bit. The second approach is from the supply side, and we simply call it the income approach. And the two values must equal each other. Okay. So if this is the demand side of the economy, this is the supply side of the economy, then one person's spending becomes some person's income, and another person's income is generated by some person's spending. So again, this is why they equal. The reason they equal is they have to equal. It doesn't make sense that they would not equal. Now, here's the thing. What if the national income accountants are putting this information together and they don't equal, they don't balance? And by the way, they don't balance. Exactly. So what happens is they're made to balance. It's what's called a statistical discrepancy, but it's not that big of a number. I mean, it sounds like, oh, okay, we're fudging, right? I mean, you can't do that in your everyday life. Well, hey, the numbers don't work, so I'm just going to plug a number in here, right? Nobody else really gets to do that anywhere in the world but the government, right? But they have to do it because why? Why aren't we sweeping up all this information? What is missing from these numbers? There's a big glaring miss here that's not reported anywhere. There's no paper trail or anything. Kind of economic events or transactions we're missing. Yeah.
Manual labor?
Could be. Well, it could be labor that's maybe paid under the table. Is that what you mean? Like I hire you to cut weeds in my yard, right? And I give you $50. You're probably not going to report that on your taxes, right? Did you create value? Yes. Should it go in GDP? Yes, but it's not. So, and we're going to talk more about what is missing on this next. What is missing? So that's an example. Underground economic activities, which sounds kind of so dark and sinister. And sometimes it is, because what's one big area of the economy where nobody's reporting it because you'd be out of your mind too. What's that? Well, we collect information on churches, except that they're tax exempt. So the not-for-profit area of the economy we do capture. Here I will think sinister, and that's the any kind of illegal activity we're missing, right? And the reason that we're missing it is because you'd be crazy to report in sales in your tax returns, right? I'm sure it's been done before, but I mean, among your trouble, if you're in the drug trade, or money laundering goes along with that. So if you're connected to the drug trade, you'd be out of your mind on your taxes because it's a big red flag, right? And by the way, that's another way the government can, it's the whole Al Capone thing, where Al Capone wasn't gotten, prosecuted and sent to prison for his illegal activities. He was sent there famously because of tax evasion. He was reporting his illegal activities. And so as a result, he got on that particular charge, right? So it's just another way to chip you in. By the way, on the corporate return, I was sort of surprised when I was in commercial lending. Somebody was saying, look on some line on the corporate tax return. There's a line, and it kind of blew me away. It actually says income from extortion, and I thought, are you kidding me? Or embezzlement, income from embezzlement, or something like that. It's actually a line, pre-printed line on the corporate tax return. Because if you don't report it, then that's a tax evasion issue. So that's. So what about this? Is this a big deal or is it not a big deal? The fact that we're not accounting for the illegal, and we're talking about the illegal trade, by the way. Like the cannabis business down in New Mexico is legal, but there is an illegal part of that, I'm sure, that still exists. But we're talking about the illegal part of the economy. Is it a big deal or is it not? And the answer to that is, I guess it depends upon who you ask. It really does. Some economists would say it's not a big deal because if we're tracking the measurement of goods and services and drugs are bads, I mean, we're kind of playing on words here, then why would we want to account for them in the first place? All we're doing is moving money around. It's not really adding value. So that's an interesting approach. I mean, it sounds a little bit cute, right? To say, well, drugs are bad, so therefore let's not account for them. Well, there are a lot of bad things, I guess you could, I mean, junk food's not good for you, but we account for it, right? Motorcycles probably aren't. The motorcycles have never made anybody healthy, right? They're not good, but we account for them. They're somewhat dangerous, but legal. So it really depends upon who you ask. Also, the size of the drug trade is very difficult to know, and it's going to be more difficult to know going forward as this business moves to the cryptocurrency part of the economy, which I am frankly amazed is even legal. Does anybody have any involvement? Anybody do anything with Bitcoin or the many hundreds of cryptocurrencies out there? We're going to talk much more about money a bit later in the course, money as money, but the cryptocurrencies that are proliferating worldwide. It's a little bit amazing. It goes to this idea, it's a recurring theme pretty much everywhere when it comes to government regulation. The government is always behind the curve when it comes to regulating things. And so as a result, these currencies are out there, and it's a perfect way for illegal activities to be funded and to operate completely anonymously. And you can move money around, you can buy and sell things, and that doesn't even account for the whole dark web, which is sort of 2 layers deep in the internet, which, as I understand it, I'm not a resident of that part of the internet, but apparently you can buy and sell whatever you like, right? So that's another missing part of the economy. So yeah, there are some missing pieces. We're going to get to that a bit later. Number, but it's not insignificantly small either. So we just don't really know the size of it, I think, is the problem. And we're not going to know any as crypto proliferates and becomes out there. And I honestly don't see crypto being, there's Bitcoin and Ethereum and Litecoin, all these hundreds of different cryptocurrencies. I don't see them being outlawed anytime soon. I mean, the Chinese government was way ahead of everyone else, but if anything, governments are looking to create their own cryptocurrencies. The Federal Reserve has been looking into it for some time, as are others. So it's interesting that we're going to maybe miss some things simply because of that. Okay. All right. So those are the 2 approaches to GDP accounting. And so before we get into some of these shortcomings, let's talk a bit about how we do the accounting. I'm going to take these one at a time here. So, and I'm going to talk first about the demand side of the economy. And we're going to sort of tear into these and see how what these look like. Okay, so let me swivel the camera here a little bit. And you guys who are in class, it's always like, oh gosh, got to wait for him to move the camera. So yes, you do. I'm sorry. Sorry. Okay, so let's take the first one, the expenditures approach. Okay, so the expenditures approach is oftentimes, I think when people are talking about spending throughout the economy, a lot of times it's easier to refer to the expenditures approach before it is anything else. And so let's talk about what the elements are of the expenditures approach. So we're going to start with the left side of the equation here as GDP, right? GDP, or henceforth, we'll just simply call it Y, right? And it's composed of four terms. I mean terms in the mathematical sense: C plus I plus G, and then plus or minus what is called X minus X sub n, okay? All right, I've spread these out deliberately. And the reason I did so was because I'm going to put the subcategories that go into this, because these are big numbers, okay? And there's a lot of stuff that's captured. This is the entire spending throughout the economy. This is all macro spending. So in an economy of $25 trillion, there's a lot of pieces to this. And so let's tear into these, okay? What are these pieces individually? Well, GDP is also known as Y. When we talk about consumption, what we talk about is the formal term is something called personal consumption expenditures, or PCE. So if you're looking in for this data in the national income accounts, it's formally known as PCE, or personal consumption expenditures. And this is what it means: personal consumption. This is by households. So this is not things like 18-wheelers and cranes and that kind of stuff, machine tools. It's things that ordinary people would buy. And the thing about this is a pretty big number. It's usually considered to be around 68 to 69% of the economy, something like that. And historically, it's been usually around 2/3 of the economy. That's a little bit more than 2/3. And I know during the last recession, not the little mini recession, the days of COVID, this number shot up to like 72% of GDP, mostly because of the fall off in this guy here. This dropped like a stone. So even though this was dropping, this was still holding its own for the most part. We're going to talk about that, because investment spending, which is business spending, went off the rails, just almost went to zero. Not zero, but it went down a lot. So this is a big percentage. This is spending by households, which, by the way, one of the things that I think is important to recognize and keep in mind is the idea that sometimes I think we have the idea that the government favors big business over ordinary households. And so some of the policies and decisions and directions they take are meant to favor big business over ordinary households. But in reality, this is a big part of the spending throughout the economy. And and we've certainly seen a lot of activity last few years, the government trying to prop up ordinary households, right? By stimulus checks, by tax breaks, by sort of forbearance on some of the Social Security taxes during the last big recession. So the consumers got a big role to play. So I think it's not worthwhile to minimize the role of the consumer at all. It's the consumer plays a very big role in the economy. Okay. All right. Under consumption, you see there are three big categories. Okay. And what are those categories? The first category is what is called durable goods. Durable goods spending. What are durable goods? Well, the term durable should suggest that these have a fairly sturdy characteristic. These are goods that are expected to last at least 3 years. Okay. Goods are expected to last at least 3 years. So what are we talking about? Give me some examples of these expected to last greater than 3 years. What are they? Vehicles. Not homes, but homes are a little bit different. And homes is the one thing that trips everybody up. And I'll get to that in a bit. So, because a lot of homes are used homes anyway. So like you buy a home, it's already been accounted for. But you're on the right track. Cars, right? Cars and trucks. What else? Boats, computers, furniture, appliances, all this stuff, bedroom suits, things which have a physical characteristic that are going to last. These are durable goods, expect to last at least 3 years. And the thing that we should know about this is that these are consist of, and I sort of hesitate to use this term because it really is relative to your own situation, what we call big ticket items. Big ticket items, and I put that in quotes because somebody buying a car, it's no big deal to write a check. Others, it's a major purchase. To most people, it's a major purchase. So, but these are big ticket. Buying a car is always a durable good. Buying a new car, now these are new cars, not used cars. And so we go back to this issue, we mentioned homes. A lot of home sales are of existing goods, and so they don't count. So if I sell my car to you, that doesn't count in GDP. Why? Because it's already been produced. This is new goods. Because why? Nobody's earning income off of my selling you my car, right? I mean, anything that comes into me it's not really income. It's just I'm giving the value for my car, right? My car is worth X amount of dollars, and all you're doing is converting that to cash. That's all that's happening. This is income from newly produced goods. So these are big ticket items. And one thing that we should know about these is that they're often financed by borrowing. Not always, certainly not always, but they're often financed by borrowing. And so if you think about things like cars, for instance, if right now, let's put real estate to the side because it's a whole different category. But big ticket cars are often financed by borrowing. Furniture, same deal. Even if you don't go to a bank to borrow, you might put it on a credit card or some sort of installment plan. Even something like a layaway plan or a buy now, pay later is actually borrowing. Like I know you periodically see ads on TV for, hey, buy this living room set for $2,000, don't pay until next year, right? Well, that's really a form of borrowing because there's an implicit interest rate built into it, right? It really is. I mean, they know exactly what they're doing. What your response ought to be is, okay, what's the price if I pay you cash today, right? And depending upon the person who's selling it to you, they may not know what the heck you're talking about. They may think you're nuts. But in fact, whoever designed the program knows that, okay, well, we get paid a year from now, so we've got to be compensated for the fact our furniture is in someone's house for the next year. We've got nothing to show for it, so we need to be compensated for that. Because we had to pay for that, we had to pay all the labor and everything that brought that to market. So that is a form of borrowing. Even the buy here, pay here, or layaway, all that is a form of borrowing or a form of financing. Okay, so durable goods. So we're talking about things, and these are household goods. So these would not include 18-wheelers again. Even if you have an 18-wheeler at your house, that would make you a business. I mean, I can't imagine anybody would buy a Kenworth and just drive around town. I'm sure it's happened before, but it's a business asset. So these are durable goods by households: washers and dryers, TVs, computers, furniture, that sort of stuff. So durable goods. Okay, so that's the first category. Well, the second category, oh, and by the way, this 3 years, this used to be 5 years. For a long time, it was 5 years. And the idea was, okay, well, what was one big item that was in durable goods for years and years was automobiles. It was the big elephant in the room that of this category, automobiles just sort of swamped the list of goods. And today, every year that goes by, as the economy gets bigger, the auto industry goes down. And I come from the part of the country where the auto industry is very big. Auto manufacturing, auto employment, everybody connected to it. Parts manufacturing, companies manufacture glass, insurance companies that insure cars. And the auto business is sort of declining. Not that it's not growing, but the economy is growing faster than the auto industry. And so, and the durable goods industry is also growing faster than the auto industry. And so as a result, the auto industry, every year that goes by, becomes less and less important. And today, if one of the automakers went under, I don't know that the government would rush in to try to save it like was done back in 2008. I could be wrong. I mean, Tesla may not make it. I mean, Tesla is actually a pretty strong firm, but they sell an expensive product. I mean, I don't know how Tesla expects to really sort of move into the ranks of competing with Toyota and GM. I mean, are there really affordable Tesla products out there? I don't really know. But that's not exactly. What is it? I mean, cars themselves are expensive. I get that, and trucks. My wife and I bought a truck, and it was like, oh my god, it's like, what's that? Teslas? Yeah, right. Yeah, but it used to be 5 years because cars, 5 years was pretty good. I mean, a car should last 5 years. Most cars should. But what's the one big thing that typically 5 years is too long that we as consumers have? It's computers and all the stuff we have. Computers, they become obsolete very quickly. I mean, I've got computers in my house that they're just old. They just don't do what we need for them to do. So computer, laptops, cell phones, iPhones, portable devices, mobile technology, all that sort of thing. It's got a much faster time frame. And so, anything 3 years or more. So 3 years is kind of the minimum. Okay, so that's the first category, durable goods. Big ticket items, however you define big ticket, it's sort of a euphemism here for more expensive than this next category, which is non-durable goods. So you probably saw this happening, right? So non-durable goods are all the goods as goods that are less than 3 years, expected to last less than 3 years. Okay, expected to last less than 3 years. So what are we talking about here? Well, everything that is a physical substance, right? That is not expected to last 3 years. So things like food and clothing and ordinary household items, things you buy around the house, all the detergents and soaps and things like that. Even clothing itself. And yes, I know a lot of clothing will last greater than 3 years. I understand that, but for the most part, clothing can also wear out very quickly as well. And if you want to talk about quality of goods, a lot of clothing is sort of meant to wear out, so a lot of goods are meant to wear out. And this is one thing that we're going to get to a bit later, if not today, certainly on Thursday, when we talk about some of the shortcomings of this measure is that maybe the qualitative aspects are missing because we really have trouble accounting for quality. All we have is a dollar figure, but we don't know if a dollar figure of output today is equivalent to a dollar value 20 years ago, 50 years ago. Even if we adjusted for price changes, the inflation aspect is this planned obsolescence is the term, right? That is, you make a good that is designed to wear out. Because why? What's the point of making a good that nobody comes back to buy, right? So you could theoretically have a razor that will last years, but nobody wants to do it because you can't sell them any more of them. Last I heard, I don't know if this is still true, Edison's original light bulb was still burning. His original light, it's 100-year-old light, was still burning.
Designed to last forever.
because yeah, but who would nobody's going to make a light bulb that you sell one time, because you want to have people coming back, So you can make goods that last a little bit longer. Also, you can make a car that is perfectly safe and nobody will ever get hurt in a car. But it would cost about $1 million to do that.
Trouble back in 2014 for pre-planned obsolescence of their devices.
Who did?
Apple.
Oh, Apple, yeah. Well, a lot of these, and this is the controversial aspect of some of these goods, where some of these goods are and it's a real issue, particularly durable goods, because some of these durable goods are not exactly safe products. Things like table saws and automobiles and motorcycles. It sounds like I'm on a real rampage against motorcycles. I'm just simply saying they're dangerous products. They really are. My first wife was in the medical profession. She called them donor cycles. Donor cycles, and at their demise, I can tell you that. But my point is though that you could make these goods safer, and they'd be so expensive nobody could buy them probably. So, and they wouldn't be the same experience at all. So we're going to get to the quality aspect, but non-durable goods, everything else of a physical nature, and food and clothing are the big ones there. And we're going to talk about this issue of food because particularly when it comes to the prices of these, food in particular is up and down. And energy in particular are very volatile goods in terms of, not in terms of the quantity that's being consumed, because that's relatively stable. In fact, we're going to make the case that everything in this category is relatively stable, but the prices aren't necessarily. Gasoline, we know, is not stable. Food prices are not stable. And I know that the last couple of classes I've been in, somebody's mentioned the price of eggs, and it's like a big thing now. I guess the eggs have tripled in price or something like that. It's a real, I don't know what it's about. Something about bird diseases or whatever. So that's an issue. Food and energy and gasoline, we know, is up and down, up and down. And the last I heard, oil analysts are predicting gasoline is probably going to go up to above $4 a gallon.
I learned more about the causation of this shortage. It's going to be soon a chicken shortage too.
Chicken shortage.
Like Tyson, these big brands that have huge chicken farms, one chicken in one of their coops was, tested sick and killed the whole flock.
Yeah, to destroy the right.
So now they're buying chickens from smaller farmers for $8 a chicken, which is extremely high price. That sounds like
$8 a chicken. Yeah, that's a wholesale price. So
Yeah.
that does seem pretty high. So, so yeah, I mean, so we're going to get into that because that's really the subject of the day is prices. Food and energy both go to this category here, and we say these are the most volatile portion of consumer spending, and we know that that is the case. And we're sort of lucky in this part of the country is that we don't have to spend a lot on heating. We really are lucky. I mean, there are a lot of times we don't even at night run our heat at all. We're perfectly comfortable. Where I grew up, if you just run your heat at night, you'd be an ice pick in the morning. You'd be frozen solid. So we're sort of lucky in that respect, but we still have to drive, and we still have to eat. So we are not immune from those spikes in the two most volatile portions in terms of price, not so in terms of dollar overall, but in terms of just the price per unit, because we can dial it down to some extent. Okay, that's first category is durable goods, second category, non-durable goods, and the final category here is services. So we talked about goods and services earlier in the class. There was a reason, because it really does have application to what we're doing here. And that is the idea. Remember, we said that, yes, we're going to, goods and services are different. Here's how they're different. Goods have a physical nature. They can be inventory. There's a lag time between production and consumption. Even though we may use the term goods as a euphemism for goods and services, there are differences, and here's where there are differences. And that is services are one part of the economy that does not have a physical characteristic. They're simply personal things done for other people. So, and what are some examples of these? And it's a long list of things which are examples. So what are some examples of services that go into this category? Legal, professional services of all kinds. So legal, accounting, include things like healthcare. And I want to be a little bit careful with the healthcare piece, because healthcare itself is sometimes sort of exaggerated and mischaracterized, because if you talk about healthcare as not an industry, but as a sector of the economy, and a sector is just a giant swath of the economy that we dump together, industries that are related but different. Healthcare is one of the 10 or 11 industrial sectors of the economy, at least according to the Standard & Poor's delineations. But healthcare is not just all services, because there are a lot of physical goods in healthcare, such as pharmaceutical drugs that have a physical characteristic. That's a big part of the economy. All products, things like syringes and hospital beds and crutches and wheelchairs. All these things are these mobility sort of aids. It's a big part of the economy also. And you would think, well, why aren't those durable goods? Well, they could be, but we tend to dump a lot of this into healthcare in general. And healthcare is a big part of the economy. And by the way, and there's been a lot of talk about healthcare. We could do an entire degree program on healthcare economics, but there's been a lot of efforts to try to revise how we finance healthcare in this country. Because here's the strange thing about healthcare in general. It's very controversial. President Obama attempted to tackle it, did probably more than any other president, try to bring it into the affordability range for everybody by saying that everybody should have health insurance. And so as a result, the economy began to go down for the first time because we had more people participating, right? It didn't go down, just the rate of increase went down. And that was something because the rate of healthcare expenditure is going up and up and up. And so when President Clinton tried it back in the 90s, it was 1/7 of the economy. So healthcare back in the 90s was 1/7 of GDP. And by the time President Obama got to it, it was 1/6 of the economy, and it's on its way to 1/5. And very soon, it'll be $1 in $5 is going to go somewhere in healthcare, and it's going to be to doctors. Clearly, I mean, doctors and physicians, and or all kinds of medical practitioners and services and things like physical therapists and psychologists and all that. All that goes into healthcare as a service, and as a result, that's growing. And it's pretty controversial because we have a system of privately funded healthcare for the most part. Unlike most of the industrial world where everyone's covered under something like a Medicare program. In fact, Canada, our neighbor to the north, has a program they call Medicare. It's named like our Medicare, only covers everybody, not just people 65 and older. So we could go on and on and on about healthcare. I want to, other than to point out it's a big portion of this. And so services are a big portion of this. of this particular category. So healthcare goes this. So legal, accounting, healthcare, a lot of things like entertainment go into this. There's no physical substance to the good. So, and the list goes on and on. You got landscapers and dog groomers, and I mean, it just goes on and on and on. Wedding planners. I mean, the list never really ends. And I want to revisit one thing I talked about earlier in class, and that was this idea. And I think at one time, a lot of people believed that services were sort of the minor leagues, and it was the production of goods, the physical stuff that was really output you could see and touch and feel. And that was where the real value was. This was kind of rinky-dink and kind of low rent, but that's not really the case so much. In fact, this is growing fast. Excuse me. This third category is growing faster than these first two categories. And as we see when we get into the numbers of total output of the economy and in relation to the rest of the world, we really are doing very well in services. And so if anything, services are probably superior to durable goods. And by the way, I think if you're a business, there are lots of problems with managing goods in general. I don't know if anybody's taken accounting yet, but there are all kinds of issues about goods. Having them spoiled, lost, just accounting for them, you know.
Is this like a trend since the end of World War II? Since World War II?
It's a trend, yeah, it's a trend. The idea of and a lot of it can be this, right? As we get wealthier and whatnot, we would rather have people do things for us than us do it ourselves, right? So all kinds of services that we have, things like dry cleaning, right? That really didn't exist until we had the affluence to be able to do that particular kind of thing. Healthcare itself has just grown tremendously. And part of the reason why is demographic as well when it comes to healthcare. As our population gets older, and throughout the industrial world, populations are getting older on average. And there's this big boom in population throughout the 20th century that has slowed down. The growth of population really worldwide is slowing down. But you've got a bunch of older people, and I'm beginning to creep into that category, right? Some of you are saying, what do you mean beginning? You've been there for a while, right? So, or in that category, and we demand more healthcare. And I know that if you get older, something is going to go wrong if you are fortunate enough to live. I know I had an uncle who said he was the millisecond I turned 60, everything started to go wrong. And I was telling my doctor, he goes, that's not right. About 60 is when things start to go haywire with your body. It's like, oh my gosh, I'm not looking forward to being 60 here soon. So, but you get the idea. As we get older, we demand more healthcare, and we also demand more sophisticated and expensive healthcare. And we're being kept alive where in years past we would not be kept alive by a lot of the things. And I know I've got relatives, my sister-in-law, who would probably have not survived the cancer she had about 4 years ago were it not for the services that were available. The treatment didn't exist 30 years ago. She would not have survived. So we're living longer, we're spending more, and it's a boost. And it's a boost to this area, but it's also a boost to the economy. So you really can't say that economically it's any amount of spending is considered income to somebody else. And by the way, when we get into economic theory, and we'll talk about this, we'll talk about the idea of sort of, if we go back and discuss this long-held criticism that goods are the real thing and services are the minor leagues, it's the cheap seats. It doesn't really make any difference. The economist John Maynard Keynes said, it doesn't matter what you produce, just produce something and sell it and get income and then go buy stuff. It doesn't really make any difference. And he talked about this idea that if the economy needs a boost, the government can just simply hire 100 people to dig a hole in the first shift and hire another 100 to fill it back up in the second shift. It makes no difference what you're producing. Now that sounds like a government operation, unfortunately, but you get the idea. It doesn't really, but there is a qualitative difference. But macroeconomically, from a numerical standpoint, which is all that we're really measuring in this, is just the quantitative measure in terms of dollars. A dollar of spending is a dollar of spending. Okay, so that is all when it comes to consumer spending. Those three categories: durable goods, non-durable goods, and services. Okay, all right. So questions about C, which is big part of the economy. It's traditionally about 2/3 of the economy. 2/3 would be about 67%, but it's kind of crept up a little bit in recent years. So what about I? What does I stand for? What does it mean? In the national income accounts that we're going to see, and I don't think we're going to get to today, it is known as gross private domestic investment. Gross private domestic investment. The key word here is P for private because it's all private sector spending. It's not government spending. So if government buys a helicopter, that does not go into this. But if Donald Trump buys a helicopter, it does go into that. Okay, so there are different ways that we categorize what could be the very same good. If I buy a file cabinet, right, it goes under consumption. If my firm buys a file cabinet, it goes under investment. If a government agency buys it, it goes under this. So same good could have different categories depending upon who's doing the expenditures, okay, as to who's doing it. But here it's all private, it's non-governmental, and it's also non-consumer. This is business spending primarily. Now here I could tell you more or less what we would expect. It's a pretty stable percentage share of total spending throughout the economy, year after year after year, of what goes into consumption. This is up, down, up, down. We can't even give you an estimate. Sometimes it's been as high as 20% of the economy, sometimes low single digits as a percentage of the economy. It is theoretically possible it could be negative even. And I would imagine that probably over time, some economies will probably have negative investment. And you're thinking, how do you get negative investment? It's almost like negative velocity. Well, it's possible, and I'll show you how it is. Even though I think in our economy, it'd be extremely rare, but it could happen. It could. Wartime economies probably experience negative investment. I think it's very possible. So what are the categories that go into gross private domestic investment? This is business spending. So we're going to sort of revisit the circular flow model a bit later, well, probably Thursday. And we'll see how these all sort of shake out as a share of spending in the economy. What's the first category when it comes to this? And something called fixed investment. And just like if you look at old textbooks, old websites, or some old document that makes its way to the internet. And by the way, there's a lot of, I bring this up, and I mentioned it a couple of times now, only because a lot of students like to sort of, knock on doors on the internet to find stuff to help them learn. I think it's great. I think the internet is really awesome, particularly for what we're doing, because there's so much stuff out there. But sometimes you'll run across some really old documents. I ran across a speech that was given in the early 70s by Alan Greenspan, who up until somewhat recently was the head of our Federal Reserve. And it was from the 70s, and it was a little bit outdated. And so sometimes some of these ideas are outdated because they've changed their importance or they've changed names. So this used to be called business fixed investment, or BFI. Today we simply dropped that term off. It's called fixed investment. What is it? Think of it as business durable goods. It's the same idea. And these are durable goods for businesses, right? So one way to explain this is to simply look at it as this kind of thing. By the way, the term fixed is really an accounting term for this. Has anybody had accounting before in this class? Okay, well, if you haven't, that's fine. But there's a term fixed assets in accounting, which refers to things which are going to be around for a while. It's not like buying a coffee for the office. It's not going to be around. It's buying a computer. It's buying a conveyor belt. It's going to be around. It may not be fixed in location, but it's going to be fixed on the books of business for a while, right? Even an 18-wheeler is considered a fixed investment, even though it's moving around. It's fixed on the books. So what are some examples of this? It would be it's business durable goods spending. So it would include things like machinery, right? For businesses, right? So it include machinery, it would include technology, which I know is not very specific. Technology includes lots of things, both hardware and software, and but machinery, technology, it would include this idea of infrastructure. And this is business infrastructure. And the term infrastructure is, and I'll put infrastructure / logistics because it's the entire chain of value that moves goods. And it includes things like trucks and conveyor belts and temporary storage facilities like pods. A lot of goods are kept on things like containers, shipping containers. And some of those shipping containers are designed so they can be taken off the dock, off the ship, and propped onto the back of an 18-wheeler, boom, off he goes, right? And that's logistics. All that is fixed investment by businesses. Even though they're not fixed in place or moving around, they're still there. This whole idea of infrastructure and logistics, and I know that this is sort of the intersection of engineering and business today, which is why a lot of engineers study business as well, because it's really a big part of the economy, this idea of how we move stuff around. Because it's a competitive world, we're moving stuff long distances around the world, and most economies in the world have opened themselves up to this kind of thing, and this is why. globalization is really depends upon these investments, and they are investments by businesses. And by the way, this analogy to consumer spending of durables is not out of place at all, because these are big ticket items, often financed by borrowing, which is why we're going to say this is unreliable in terms of putting a percentage of GDP on, because it's just too up and down.
So is it dependable on or dependent on the interest rates?
Yeah, very much dependent. In fact, we're going to say all of this category here under I is very much dependent upon interest rates. Now, we haven't talked very much about interest rates yet, and we're going to. And it's the idea interest rates are simply the price of money. Okay, I don't want to put my own money into something. I'd rather use somebody else's money, which, by the way, is a perfectly logical and a realistic thing. Why would I want to use my money if I could borrow someone else's money and make more money on someone else's money, right? I remember I had a professor when I was an undergraduate who was saying that it's what made America great was borrowing money. And I don't quite buy that all the way, but I know what he's getting at. He was saying, I can borrow someone else's money, I can make more money on that, I can pay them back, they're happy, I'm happy, everyone's happy, and I don't have to put my own money into it, right? Well, it's a pretty good trick, right? So, but it's not a trick. And in fact, I taught finance for a number of years. In fact, we make the case that if you're a business and you don't have any borrowings, you're probably not managing the firm properly. You're probably not managing the firm. No debt it's for an individual, it's not the same analogy at all. And this is where it drives economists crazy when we hear people say, try to compare businesses to individuals. It's not a comparison. You can't make a comparison. An individual that has 90% of his assets financed by borrowing is probably in kind of rough shape, lots of debt. It's not uncommon at all for a business to have a gigantic amount of debt in relation to that, and a very small amount of ownership. But why not? Why not use someone else's money if you can make more money off of it? It makes sense. And so, and not all of it's borrowed, some of it's invested funds from investors and whatnot, but that's you get the idea. The idea is that it's big ticket items, often financed by borrowing. Back to your point, interest rates have a big impact on this. When we talk about interest rates, we're going to give a more concrete definition. We're going to say it's the rental cost of money. The rental cost of money. Whenever you borrow, you're simply renting money and you're giving it back with the price is the interest rate that you pay, the premium. Okay, that's the first category: business, fixed investment, or simply fixed investment. The second category is new construction. New construction, and so here, this is new construction of any kind that is not connected to government. This is, remember, this is gross private domestic investment. This is new construction. So here we've really got some categories we should talk about. And let's start from maybe the business going outward. And so we're talking about things like industrial construction, building a new plant, which differs from commercial construction because the key issue here has to do, why it's differentiated a lot of times is because even though sometimes they're put together as C&I, right, commercial industrial, they are different in the sense industrial construction is very unique to whatever the activity is, and oftentimes does not have alternative uses. If you're going to build a steel plant, that steel plant is always going to be a steel plant. You're never going to convert it to a McDonald's, right? But if you build a strip mall, you could have, within that, you could have insurance agencies, and they could stay for 5 years. You can have dog groomers, you can have a Subway, you can have, you get it, dentists, a physical therapist. There's alternative uses for commercial and retail space. Commercial retail goes into this idea of commercial, so it goes into that, right? There's also agriculture, but I won't get into that. And then residential construction. So this is where people say, whoa, wait a minute, blow the whistle, throw the red flag, challenge, right? Why does residential construction go into this? Why doesn't it go into consumption? Because it's household goods. Well, here's the thing. We're talking about the initial production of a final good. And who does the production of houses? It's businesses, right? So businesses create houses. When you're buying even a new house, it's a resale of a new house, right? I mean, you're not, now, if you build the house yourself, that effectively makes you a contractor, and it still goes into private domestic investment. If you build the house yourself, and there are people who do build houses themselves, but it makes you a contractor. But that's really not that different from anything that you would do for yourself that would otherwise be done by a business, right? You could theoretically build a TV set, right? It'd be hard, but you could do it. build houses all the time. They build cars all the time. You could just get on the internet and buy a car and they'll ship it to you by UPS and you can put the car together. It happens all the time, right? And so you could do that without having to go to some, so it's not unusual, but it goes under here because primarily it's a business activity. Most people don't build their own houses. So it is an idea that it falls under business spending for the most part, okay? And then the new construction category, which if I said that the interest rate sensitivity is there for everything in this category, and it is, certainly construction is impacted by interest rates, no question. And with residential, we could slice and dice this even further. And if you were able to, if you really are taking interest in, and maybe you don't, but going into these accounts in the DEA website, you'll see this is subdivided into things like multifamily, that is apartments, or 1 to 4 family unit dwellings, which are single family to quadruplex, duplexes. I mean, it goes on. Single family detached, single family attached, like condos and townhomes. So all of this goes into this particular category. Okay. All right, and then one final category. This is one that is where it is potentially theoretically possible to have a negative overall category. It would just be a very unusual situation. That is change in inventories, which we simply are going to refer to henceforth as delta INV. Changes in inventories. Okay, let's talk about changes in inventories and what that means and why it's important. Okay, so think about this. One way that we measure output in the economy is by tracking changes in inventories, because if goods sell this year, maybe they were made last year, and so we have to adjust for the fact that inventories are changing. So as a result, what can we say about this? If the change in inventory is positive, then it really contributes to a rise in GDP. I mean, actually goes a change in I. Let me just make that a little bit clearer here. So when we're talking about a change in inventory that is upward, it leads to an increase in overall I, which leads to an increase in overall GDP. So a rise in inventories, because what does it mean? It means that all the output that went into it, all the wages have been paid, all the materials have been paid, it's now final good. So rising, it brings up I, which is just on the right side of this, and it must mean if this side's going up, that side's got to go up. So it brings up GDP. And the other issue is if inventories are falling, it's just the opposite. It's a disinvestment, and so as a result, it actually depresses GDP if inventories are falling. And here I want to say something that oftentimes needs to be understood, because oftentimes, particularly on the part of the media that's not directly involved in economics and finance, they sort of interpret some of this data wrongly. And how they do it is they'll report something like inventories are rising, and they'll make an interpretation that things are bad because people aren't buying goods. And so therefore, that's a bad sign, inventories are rising. Well, actually, we would say that's a good sign, because why? Because why would anybody bulk up on inventory unless they plan to do what with it? Sell it, right? And businesses are pretty good at managing inventory. And they're doing a better job of cutting down total inventory. And if you need any evidence of that, just look at the pandemic and how the supply chain was shown to be very vulnerable to that. Also, sometimes more important, inventories are falling, but somehow goods are flying off shelves, and that's a good thing. But it's actually a form of disinvestment. Businesses are dialing down investment. Okay. So anyway, so our questions for me about so far where we are with the expenditures approach. This does take a bit of time to get through. I realize that, but when we come back on Thursday, we'll pick up the discussion about. We'll start with G, the government spending, and then we'll get into the final piece, which is net exports, and we'll do that. And then we'll get into the income approach, and we'll wrap this up. And if we have time, we may or may not get into chapter 8. It's sort of up in the air, but we're in no hurry. We've got the rest of the spring to deal with it. So, okay, any questions for me about anything? All right, have a great rest of your day. See you next time.